All right, episode 2 of patterning, which means you made it through the first episode, 20 minutes of me drawing 2 stubs of a line. If you haven't, pump the brakes. Go take a look at that one first. That's a rite of passage. It builds character. I'll put a link somewhere. This episode will be fun because we're taking a look at using the fill pattern to fill in that region. It's appropriately named. I'm Jesse. These are some solid ideas. So here we'll be filling out this pocket with this sort of honeycomb shape, and we're going to be using the fill pattern to do this. Now, what we need to do to make that happen is to make the first seed feature and then find a region that we can fill that with. So it's a pretty straightforward process. Just like the last episode, let's just jump back right to the beginning and we'll start from scratch here. So I'll roll back in the tree and we can recreate this again. So the first thing that we're going to do is start off with this sketch. Now from the rib, we wanted to start from the top and work our way down because we had those end conditions to take advantage of. In this case, we're going to be just drawing the actual seed that we're going to pattern, so it doesn't really matter. I'm going to start off with a sketch on this bottom face, so we'll say sketch, and we'll mark off the middle for this as well. I'll just go vertical this time. And with our centerline tool, we'll just mark off from top to bottom, like that. And then we'll use our polygon tool, which is this guy over here. We can search for that or just grab it off of the toolbar, and we'll make our shape right in the middle here. All right, we'll set a dimension on this from here to here, just the width of the hex shape here. So I'll select the two of those just using control, and I'll just put a dimension in for that, which is 2 inches for this. And we'll lock this down by just dragging and dropping this to get our auto relation to lock this in place, because right now it can do a little bit of rotation. So we'll lock that down in place. Unlike the rib where we'll leave that underdefined and let that find its way, this time we want to actually make the geometry that we're looking to create. So that looks pretty good. We'll leave that like that. And from here we can use this and we'll create a thin extrude similar to what we did with the rib. So I'll use my D key, bring the confirmation corner to my cursor. We'll say exit sketch, and from here we'll create an extrude. So I'll just use my S key again. We'll select extrude, but instead of extruding this whole region, we just want to add some thickness to the edges that we're working with here. So once we look at our boss extrude, we'll check on thin feature, which will then just take the profile that we have created and it will add some thickness to it. So we'll go mid-plane on this. That's just mid-plane for the thickness of the material. So the material that's added will be centered on the profile that we drew. That way we just know what our spacing is going to be. So we're spacing on center, and we can add this thickness, maybe bump this up a little bit, and we can increase the depth of this to, I don't know, something to make that texture. Okay. That looks pretty reasonable. So we're going from the bottom and extruding up. So from here, we can say, okay. And at this point, we're ready to make this pattern. Now, the pattern that we're going to be using is a specific pattern for filling in that region. So again, I'll use my S key, use the drop down, and we're looking for fill pattern. Now, again, I have the drop down customized. I'll have a video on more interface customization as far as how I did that coming up. But if you're looking for it in the command manager, it would be in this same drop down under fill pattern. So if we select the fill pattern, let's just go right in here and see what this does for us and see if we need to make any adjustments. So the first thing that we needed to select for the fill is the fill boundary itself. This is the region that we're trying to fill out with the geometry that we've created. So let's say we select this face for the fill boundary, and we'll see how that works out for us. We'll select that face, and then for the feature that we want to fill, let's select the geometry that we just created, which is this little honeycomb. So initially we're getting some pretty good results already. It's filling out that face with all of the multiples of the geometry that we drew, and it's filling it out using this pattern that we have selected. So we have this pattern selected here, but you can adjust that if you have a different pattern that you need to create. You can select which pattern type you would want to have present here. So let's adjust our spacing to make this closer to what we want, because we want to fill this out with one continuous piece here. So we'll switch this to 2-inch spacing, which is what we have set as the width of that hex. And from as soon as we do that, we see that now filling this out with some overlap, but we're running into a couple of issues. First of all, we see that the pattern doesn't go all the way out to the edges, which is kind of what we want. We want it to fill this out all the way to through the bounds. But because we're using this face as the edges, it's just filling out as far as it can go with the shape that we have, which is a fairly large 2-inch hex. So it's getting up as close as it can go, and then it says, I can't fit any more here, otherwise I'll go past the boundary that you've selected. Okay, so that's one issue. We also noticed that around the center, we're having the exact same problem because we have the actual feature itself, which is taking up some real estate on the face that we have selected, and it's doing the same thing when it gets into here, so we're missing a bunch of instances in the middle because it says, well, I can't get any closer, there's something here, the seed that we created. So when you're creating geometry like this, it's often wise to create a separate sketch as the bounds, because then you can say, this is just the region that I want to fill. Do what you need to do that. So let's take a step back and let's create that by just referencing this face and making that its own boundary. So let's actually roll back one more to a point in time when that seed feature didn't exist, and we'll do the same thing. We'll create a sketch on that face, and we'll use this as our boundary. Now from here, we can do an offset on this. I'll use my S key and I'll select the offset entities tool, and we can offset one side to the other. Now we need to make enough space that the boundary is gonna fill out all the way around. So let's say we do this at 1/2 inch towards the outside. All right, so we give ourselves a little bit of a buffer where this can fill in. You might need to play with this a little bit because this will depend on the size of your seed feature that you're creating as far as what needs to actually give yourself as far as buffer to fit in where it needs to go. Let's leave it here and we'll see how that plays out for us. So we'll say okay, and then we'll roll ourselves back down beyond, whoops, we'll exit our sketch first, and then we'll roll ourselves back down to the feature that we already created. So we'll do that. Maybe we'll rename this our boundary. Call that our bounds. And let's try this again. We'll go back into our pattern. All right, so we'll go use our fill pattern. And from here, we'll try the same thing again, but instead we'll choose that sketch as our boundary. So our fill boundary will be this guy here. That should eliminate certainly the center issue that we were having, and we'll see how far things go when they get to the edges. So we'll select our geometry again for our seed for the section that we would like to pattern. And we'll set our spacing back down to where we wanted that to go, so 2 inches. Okay, perfect. So that definitely solved our center issue, and we see now our overlap has enough to fit the hexes for around the edges, and that now fills out that entire region nicely. So we'll say okay to this, and we'll let this go all the way out and see what this does for us. So we've now patterned all of these instances over top of each other. They're landing exactly where they should land on each edge because we did center to center and we did a mid-plane split on that geometry. And we now have this totally filled out, right, all the way through. Now, one thing that you're going to want to consider with this method is what the boundary actually is. So we can see up here, we needed enough for the boundary for the feature to make it all the way out, which it has. The downside is now we've got this issue where we have a very thin section towards the top, and the boundary that we needed to make this fit, we now have some overhang. So we can go back and play with the spacings of this. If the spacings aren't critical, we just need, you know, some type of pattern here. We can go back and play with the spacing, maybe move your boundary down, maybe shift your hex pattern up a little bit to try to get this to fit. Or of course, you can always go back and trim these back out if you want to do that towards the end, add another feature, and just remove that geometry back out again. Totally acceptable. The next method that you might consider using would be to make this pattern using some kind of multi-body technique, and then you have independent control over this. Specifically in a case where you have geometry like this, where you've got these bevels across the edges, and obviously we have this thin ridge across the top, it might be a lot easier to try to control this independent of the rest of the geometry, and that's exactly what we're going to take a look at in the next video. So we've taken a look at the second option for creating that type of textured geometry using the fill pattern, adjusting our boundary, getting that to fit pretty close. In the next episode, we'll take a look at how to create any type of pattern, independently control it, and I'll see you there for the next one.